Hi, this is Nicole Steele of The Joyful Stamper. I'm the owner and creator of it and also an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. And today we're going to be using the Buffalo Check background stamp and the Free as a Bird stamp set to make this card right here. I used a card sketch from Split Coast Stampers from their Wednesday Sketch Challenge to create the layout of this card. And then I knew I wanted to combine some birds with the buffalo check pattern, so I did so. And I'm going to show you today how I made this. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I cut a piece of Blushing Bride cardstock, and I have a tutorial in the description to this video that I will link to, and it will have all the measurements for everything I'm using today and also the list of supplies. So I'm starting with a piece of Blushing Bride cardstock. And I'm going to take out my Buffalo Check stamp here. And you can either use the Stamparatus for this step, or you can use a large clear block, or if you get this background stamp in the wood mount version, it would already be mounted on the wood block and you wouldn't have to do anything. I'm going to put mine on top of a clear block just like this. And with background stamps, when I'm not using the Stamparatus, I find it's easier to leave the stamp rubber side up and lay my cardstock on the inked stamp. So I'm going to use Rococo Rose, and I'm going to tap the ink pad on this Buffalo Check stamp, making sure I get full ink coverage of it. Then I'm going to carefully place my cardstock right on top there. And I'm going to take my grid paper and fold it over that. And I will then take a stamp block, which I already have a stamp mounted on it, but it'll work. And I'm going to go ahead and press that down, rubbing it over the cardstock so that the image transfer is nice and clear. And then I'm going to gently lift it off. There we go. Now the advantage of the Stamparatus is if I wasn't entirely happy with the way this image stamped, I could simply re-ink my background stamp and close the lid of the Stamparatus and stamp it again, because nothing shifts. So it's all in the exact same position. Okay, so we have our background piece done. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to glue this to a piece of Whisper White cardstock. Oh, excuse me. Before I do that, actually, I'm taking my paper snips, and I love to distress things. And the paper snips blades are super sharp, so I'm going to very gently run it across the edges of this piece of cardstock. And I'm also going to do it on the white, Whisper White cardstock layer also. If you want a heavier distressed look, you can go heavier with your scissors. But I just want a light one, so I'm just very gently scraping on this. This definitely is not a quick and simple card. Using the card sketch makes it easy to come up with the design and the layout, of course, but I felt like getting a little bit fancier with the techniques on this card. So I'm not gonna lie to you, this card takes a little bit of time, but when you're in the mood to just sit down and play and relax with your stamps and your ink and your paper, this would be a very good card to try. Okay, we just have one more side to do. Okay, and if you don't like all those little paper fuzzies on your space, just sweep them away. Now I'm going to glue everything together, and I'm going to use multi-purpose liquid glue to put a thin edge of glue around the four sides with an X in the middle, and I will attach it to this Whisper White panel. And the margins of these two pieces is very small. It's only, I think 1/8 of an inch between the two, because I actually wanted a very thin Whisper White border peeking out. Now I cut a piece of Blushing Bride cardstock at 4 1/4 inches by 11 inches, and I scored it down the middle at 5 1/2, folded it, and this is going to get put right onto this card base, which I can go ahead and do. I didn't use dimensionals on it because, as you'll see in a minute, when we start adding all the other elements to this card base, those are all popped up, and I wanted to keep this card mailable. You start adding too much dimension, then you have to put it in a different envelope and add extra postage, and that can get a little costly sometimes, especially when you're mailing out a bunch of cards, right? Okay, so we have the card base done, and now we're gonna look at all the fancier pieces. We're gonna work on those. So what I did is I stamped the bird image from Free as a Bird. Let me bring that stamp set out so you could see everything. So I stamped this bird here once. I stamped this leaf image 3 times. I stamped this larger flower twice, and I stamped this smaller flower 3 times. Now the other ones I went ahead and colored and cut out ahead of time, but these ones I'm going to show you how I colored and cut out. So just sit back and relax and you'll get to see it, and I'll tell you the colors I'm using. So for this leaf I'm going to use dark and light Shaded Spruce Stampin Blends markers. Now you can't leave these uncapped for a long period of time because they're alcohol ink, so they would dry out eventually. But I like to uncap them when I'm going to color with them, especially when I'm going to go back and forth between 2 different shades here. So I'm going to start with my light Shaded Spruce. And this is just a matter of personal preference. I prefer to start with the light color. Then I'm picking up the dark Shaded Spruce, and I'm just going to go ahead and just brush in some lines right there, darker lines. Then go over with my light Shaded Spruce again in circles to blend that all together. And then go back in with the dark Shaded Spruce just to outline it. And I'm going to repeat that on the other leaves that are on here. Now, these alcohol ink markers are so easy to use. They blend very nicely. And you can go over them with different colors and not worry about contaminating the marker tips at all. And you don't get those marker lines and those streaks that you would with our Stampin' Write markers. Each set of markers has its place in our stamping toolbox, but the Stampin' Blends, when you want to blend and shade and get variations of colors, the Stampin' Blends markers are superior for doing that job. And it's the alcohol ink in them that makes them so blendable. And don't be afraid to use these. These markers are very user-friendly. Now I'm going to outline the stem with the dark Shaded Spruce. Stamp a whole sheet of images and sit in front of your favorite TV show and just practice, practice, practice. One important thing to note though, when you're coloring with Stampin' Blends markers, you want to stamp your images with Memento Tuxedo black ink so that when you use the alcohol ink markers, it doesn't smear the stamp image. So it's really important to use this type of ink when coloring with the Stampin' Blends markers or any alcohol ink marker. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this large flower right here, and I'm going to color with the dark and light Highland Heather. I'm using the bullet tips for all of these because I find it easier to control the color when I use the bullet tip rather than the brush tip. The brush tip's good for like flicking and spattering, maybe lightly filling in. But I prefer the bullet tip for when I'm coloring. And again, it's just personal preference, which is why just relaxing and grabbing a few of these and going for it just will really help you learn your coloring style, because like anything else, there's no right or wrong with this. So I'm starting with the light Highland Heather, and now I'm going in with the dark Highland Heather. I'm not a classically trained artist. I'm just somebody that really enjoys playing with paper and ink and stamps and just makes things that appeal to me. So if there's somebody out there that's saying she's doing this wrong, I'm really sorry. I'm just doing it the way I love to. And I find that going in circles helps with the blending. Yes, your ink is going to come through the back side of your paper, so don't be alarmed. It's perfectly normal, perfectly fine. These are highly saturated markers in terms of their color. Okay, I'm adding a little bit more there, and I'm going to go in with my light Highland Heather to blend all that out, and filling this last petal in with the light Highland Heather, and now the dark. You'll see some stamps already have lines drawn on them to indicate shaded spots. You can use that as an indicator for where you want to put different shading and highlights. Now we're going to go with this light, or the small feather right here. And I'm going to bring in light Flirty Flamingo for this one, and the light Highland Heather. So I'm starting with the Flirty Flamingo, and in this case I'm going to go through and just color the entire flower with it. And then I'm going to take my light Highland Heather and I'm coloring almost the entire petal with it. I'm leaving a little bit of that Flirty Flamingo at the tip, and then I'll go back over again with the Flirty Flamingo in circles to blend those two shades together. And now I'm going to go back over again with the light Highland Heather to add a little bit more darker purple. Oh, there, I love the way that looks. With that soft pink just peeking through, that is so pretty. All right, now let's do our bird. I'm using light Smoky Slate and light Flirty Flamingo for this bird. And I'm going to start with light Smoky Slate in this case. And first I'm going to color in his beak fully. There's no blending or shading going on there, at least not for me. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just gonna lightly color in some spots on him. And I'm going to take my light Flirty Flamingo and I'm going to add some color. Now, if you were coloring a super large image, I would not color the entire image at one time with the alcohol ink markers, because once the ink dries, it can get a little hard to blend them. So in that case, I would do small sections at a time. So if we were coloring, let's say, a large flower image, I would work on one petal at a time, and then before moving on to the next one. Okay, and I'm going to go over this again with the Flirty Flamingo to blend all that out. And here's the thing, if you make a mistake or you want a little bit more blending, there is a color lifter that Stampin' Up! Has. It's perfectly clear, and you can use it to push the color around or to lighten certain sections. So if you go out the lines, let's say, you can use this color lifter to push that color back into your image. And if you think the tip's going to get contaminated with the color, just scribble it on your scratch paper until it comes off clear. Okay, I think I'm happy with this bird, so I'm going to cap my markers back up since I'll be finished with them. Actually, you know what? I think I might add a little bit more gray down there and then go over it again with the Smoky Slate. With the Flirty Flamingo. Okay. Again, not an expert. I just do it until I'm happy. And now I'm going to cut these images out. Now here's the thing. I die cut from the Stitch So Sweetly dies this label piece, and this is what all my elements are going to sit upon. So when I trim out these images here, I'm going to leave a little white halo around them. And what that'll do is, if I happen to cut crookedly, which that will happen, that white halo, because it's sitting on this white label as a background, will detract the viewer's eye from any uneven cutting I do. It will all look like one smooth image to them. Whereas if I were to cut straight up to the outline image of this stamped image, any uneven cutting would be very noticeable. So leaving that white halo, it gives me wiggle room. I don't know if you can see that effect there already. Now I'm going to cut these leaves out. I find fussy cutting to be really relaxing too. And these paper snips are small and sharp enough that I can get them into all the little nooks and crannies of these stamped images, especially something like this little leaf sprig. Is that what you would call it? Okay. And you can turn your paper rather than your scissors to get smoother cuts on the curves. And last we have our two flowers here. See, aren't you glad I went and did all the other ones ahead of time? I'm going to show you. It's an old trick, but it's a really good trick for adhering all your pieces to your card base. Maybe this has happened to you. You're kind of futzing around and playing around with all the little elements of your card. You lay them out and you realize, aha, you got them exactly where you wanted them to be. And then lo and behold, you have to remove them all in order to apply the glue, right? And then you mess up your scene. You can't get it back just the way you wanted it. Well, you can use your phone to take a picture of it and look at the picture to recreate the scene. Or what you could do is use Glad Press and Seal, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. So I cut 2 4-inch lengths of Stampin' Up's braided linen trim, and what I love about this stuff is you can pull it apart to fray it. So we can very nicely and very prettily destroy this. Make it look shabby chic, vintage shabby chic. I don't know, I remember that style from a long time ago, but I like the way it looks. It never went away from me. So I did that one piece, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the second piece. And just pull it apart as far as you want it to go. All the way down its length so that you can shape it nicely. Okay, and we're going to adhere these with mini glue dots. I find that's truly the best adhesive for sticking down things like this. Find a glue dot, there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and put it about here in the middle of my card. And I'll tuck that side down. I don't want to glue all the way to the edges because I like the way the things sort of lift up off the card. I like the way it looks. I don't know how to explain it. I just like the way it looks. I think it gives more movement to the card. And you can still go ahead and pull and shape it after you've already adhered it to your card base. You can trim down the ends if you think they're sticking out too far. It's your card, girl. You can do whatever you want. Okay, now we have this stitched nested labeled die. And this is the stitched nested label dies, and I used this one right here to go ahead and cut this piece out. Okay. And now I'm going to add to Stampin' Dimensionals to the back of this because I don't want this going anywhere. And I want it to be lifted up off my card. Okay, and I'm going to put that right over top in the center there, just like that. All right, now it's time to add all of our little elements here. And I'm just going to play around with this. So I'm going to have my bird there, I think, and I'm going to put some branches here. Make it look like he's kind of nestled in among the trees there. And I think I'll put a flower there. And maybe we can put one right on the edge there. Let's see. Let's add a little purple one there. And I think another one right there will look pretty. Yeah, I think that'll look good. Okay, so I'm going to take those little pieces off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm taking Glad Press and Seal. I don't even use this in my kitchen. I just use it in my stamp room. So it's sticky on one side, slightly sticky. And once I have everything where I want it, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to gently press this onto my stamping project like this. And just rub it a little bit so that the adhesive on that Glad Press and Seal can lift those elements off. And then if you just gently pull it away from your project, it will stay in place. And then what you can do is you can go ahead and add all of your adhesive to the back. So I'm going to use a mix of mini and regular sized Stampin' Dimensionals to do all of this. I'll put the regular sized ones on my flowers, and then I'm going to put the mini ones on the little leaf sprigs here. I can see one more area that I might want to put one right there. And then go ahead and peel off all the liners from those dimensionals. And then what you do, did I peel that? Nope, I have one more to peel off. Then what you want to do is you can flip this over and position it on your card project where you want everything to be, and just go ahead, push it down so that the adhesive, those dimensionals, stick to your card project, and then gently pull back on this Glad press and seal to release it from the stamped images. And I found that I actually can reuse this piece of Glad press and seal several times before I need to pitch it for a new one. And then now I'm going to go ahead and add these little flowers. I found that the small flowers are a little difficult to work with to get them to stick to the Glad press and seal, and they're not that hard to add at the end, so that's why I didn't bother arranging them ahead of time. And if you find some parts of your card are a little bit saggier than others, like I could see it right there, we can go in and we can add another dimensional, no problem. We can just, I'm going to put it on the end of my piercer tool. It'll come off my finger, and I'm just going to slide it right underneath there. And that'll lift it a little bit so it's not quite so saggy. I don't like saggy cards. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and just do some more tucking and layering of elements here. Just making a pretty little home for my bird. Ah, that looks nice. Okay. Then the last thing we're going to do is stamp a greeting on this card. And the one I'm going to choose from Free as a Bird this time is Thank You. So I'm going to use this curvy one right here. And where is that at? Oh, there it was, stuck to the back of another stamp. Okay. Now you can use your grid paper for this trick too. There's lines on Stampin' Up's grid paper, so what I do is I line my block up so that the bottom edge of my block is straight with one of the grid lines. Then I take my sentiment stamp and I put it on my clear block, lining my sentiment up across one of the grid lines that I can see through the clear block, and that helps me get my sentiment on my block straight. I have to pull it out of camera a little bit so I can look down to see, and I'm going to adjust it just a little bit. There we go. So that's a really good way to use your grid sheets, is to line up your sentiment stamps. I'm going to stamp it in Rococo Rose ink on Whisper White cardstock. Now, my original image, I fussy cut around. I trimmed around it like that to get it really close. I'm not going to do that with this Thank You. I'm just going to trim it into a very small rectangular piece. Make it very skinny, and I'm going to adhere it to my card with Stampin' Dimensionals. So I'm going to get as close to it as I can. And you certainly could take your paper snips and trim around it if you wanted to do so. It's your card. You can do whatever you want. Let's get those out of the way, and we'll add some more Stampin' Dimensionals to the back. I'm going to use 2. And after we adhere this, I'm going to show you something else that I do with my Stampin' Blends markers, since I already have them out. You can tuck this right underneath wherever you want. I'm going to tuck it right there. Okay, and I'm going to now pull out a package of Stampin' Up's Basic Pearl Jewels and my Light Flirty Flamingo marker, the same marker that I used to color portions of the bird and the smaller flowers there. And I'm going to use my brush tip for this one. I'm going to color some of these pearls. Because this is alcohol ink, you can use it on non-porous surfaces in addition to porous surfaces like paper. And I'm using the brush tip because it's so flexible, so it will bend around the curvature of this pearl. Now, because I'm using Light Flirty Flamingo, it will take a couple coats to get it a little bit darker. And so I'm doing one of the large pearls, and now I'm going to do a few of these smaller ones here, and I'm going to scatter them across my card. Now all these pearls come in white, so you can make them whatever color you want. You can customize them to any Stampin' Up! Color that you need to match your project. So I really like that flexibility. And now I'm going to use my piercer tool, or you take your pick tool if you have the newer version, and I'm going to start adding my Flirty Flamingo homemade pearls to my project here. These smaller ones can be a little tricky for my fingers to get a hold of here. Okay, let's put another one, I think, right down here on the sentiment. And we've got one more, if it will let me capture it. There we go. And we're going to do that one up there. Okay, now this truly is the end of my card, and yes, it took a little bit more time, but I think it was worth it because look how pretty it looks. And I hope you learned lots of little stamping tips and techniques and tricks to make your stamping session a lot more enjoyable. So again, my name is Nicole Steele of The Joyful Stamper, and if you want any of the crafting supplies to make any of these projects or just want to get in touch with me, I do have a store, shopwithnicole.stampinup.net, or you can go to my site, thejoyfulstamper.com. So thanks for stamping with me today. Bye.